Women Up Radio, designed to facilitate women's empowerment, improve your career, develop your talents, incorporate your passions, achieve fulfillment and success.
Hello, this is Women Up Radio supporting Empower Women, and today we're talking about making gender equality a reality, how advocates and women's rights groups push forward for a fairer future. I'm joined in the studio by my guest, Emily Bove, the Executive Director of Women Thrive Alliance, a leading global women's rights network which unites and mobilizes hundreds of grassroots women's rights and gender equality organizations in over 50 countries, which is enormous. Emily joined Women Thrive in 2014, and since then she's transformed what was a group of just about a dozen local partners into a vibrant 300 plus global community of advocates who focus on the implementation of Sustainable Development Goal 5 on gender equality. So welcome to the program, Emily.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So can you tell me about your career so far? How did you start off, and what led you to follow a career in women's rights and advocating for equality, and then to joining Women Thrive?
Sure. Well, I actually started my career in Aceh, Indonesia, right after the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2005.
Oh, wow.
And for a few years I did a lot of evaluation of disaster relief and aid programs. There had been so much money that had poured into Indonesia after the tsunami. And that was really an incredible way to get to understand the mechanics of aid. Yeah. And one of the very first professional lessons that I had on the ground was, wow, like local communities, local people, those that we are actually serving, they have so little power in what happens and how we do what we do. And that always just felt wrong to me.
Yeah.
I really witnessed, very limited agency from folks whose lives we were trying to change. And as an individual myself, I could understand how that was just not right, and how someone should have the opportunity to be, a co-designer and a co-leader in, a process that is looking at taking him or her and their families out of poverty. Yeah. So then, that was a huge lessons learned. I also discovered, the power of women's rights advocates in Aceh. I was on, kind of my side thing from my daily job was actually supporting a local women's rights organization there, teaching them English.
Oh, right.
They were able to just even, read and communicate with folks in the movement that were outside of Indonesia. So sometimes even just that language barrier is so important.
Yes.
But then my work took me to Cameroon in Africa, where I took a deeper dive into gender and women's issues and gender programming. The second lesson was actually, it's very similar to the first one, but focusing on women, how, grassroots women and the organizations that they create to actually lead the work that they're doing on a daily basis are just completely unplugged from our development partnerships and decision making, and that again felt very wrong. And so I started dedicating myself to really increasing grassroots women's advocates' power and their representation and participation. I worked on a wonderful program that was looking at ending sexual violence and HIV in 5 communities, and that was really a great opportunity to kind of put in practice, the values that I had picked up along the way. I was embedded in 2 wonderful Cameroonian grassroots women's rights organizations and did a lot of, capacity building and help them become stronger organizations. Then after Cameroon, coming back to the States and working with bigger organizations like the World Bank, that just kind of amplified, my belief that, women need to have a seat at the table. Yeah. Communities need to have a seat at the table. And that when they do, the work is actually so much more impactful and sustainable. So it's not just about, an ideal. It's actually about investment and how we invest in work that actually has a chance of lasting and making a real difference in people's lives.
Yeah, yeah. And I know the organization Women Thrive is transitioning, but tell us more about it and what it does and who it helps.
Absolutely. So you're right. Women Thrive will be closing down, but our work is very much going to continue. And that's the power of movements. Once you create a movement, it doesn't die easily.
Yeah.
And so, Women Thrive is a global network of grassroots women's rights organizations. We have around 300 members in over 50 countries. And what we did was we equipped our members with the skills, the resources, and the connections they needed to make gender equality a reality.
Yeah.
And we've really pioneered a model that enabled grassroots advocates to really participate and significantly influence the implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And just for our listeners, the Sustainable Development Goals, also called SDGs, are just this beautiful roadmap that all the countries in the world, 193 countries, have agreed to implement by 2030. And one of those goals is Goal 5 on gender equality, and it's just a very comprehensive strategy to end all of the big issues that women and girls face on the ground. And so when I became executive director 2 years ago, we really wanted to develop a model that promoted grassroots leadership in this process. And we were successful in doing that. We launched this incredible program called Raise Your Voice, which was about training hundreds of advocates to understand the language used in the goals, to understand advocacy, and to really align their local expertise on what their priorities are with these bigger processes that are happening.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Women Thrive was always a very small fish in the pond, despite our incredible impact. And so a few months ago, it became clear to us that the smartest way to really nurture this beautiful community of global advocates and make sure that the work would last was to kind of plug into a bigger organization that has more resources. And so I'm very grateful that we're able to do that. And we've partnered with an incredible network called World Pulse. And World Pulse is also a women's rights organization that connects 64,000 women across 190 countries.
Really? Wow.
Yes. And they're providing a supportive and protected online space where women can really connect with each other, gain digital leadership skills, and then exchange stories and resources. So the mission will continue. Women Thrive will not, but our impact has been incredible. And I think that, grassroots women's advocates are now in such a better place to actually hold governments accountable to the promise of the goals.
Yeah. So, the work that you've done and the work that Women Thrive has done, and obviously will continue now with the new organization, how does it actually impact women practically, on a day-to-day basis?
Absolutely. So our members were actually organizations, and every single one of our organization represented thousands, of women. So our model was always, if we make sure that the organizations that are really holding these women together, providing them services, providing them hope, helping them to get engaged, if those organizations are stronger, then the women themselves will have so much more opportunities and benefits, right?
Yeah.
So the tangible difference in these women's lives is that they have people that are better equipped to represent them, right?
Yes.
So whether it's at the local level when there's a program being negotiated, or even, we had members working in Cameroon that were negotiating with local chiefs to end child marriage and to make sure that local chiefs did not give their blessings to child marriage. Yeah. That organization has benefited so much from the Alliance. It's learned how to have an online presence so that they could get more support. It's learned to approach more donors that have actually funded their work in a way that they were able to scale up their programming. It's given them access to spaces where they could share those stories, both in the US and around the world, so that other people in our movement could also, show up and act in solidarity of their work.
Yeah.
So the Alliance was really this incredible support network. But if you allow, I just want to read, 3 quotes that some of our members have been sending to us.
Yeah. As
we transition. They've been very vocal and supportive. And I think this is just a beautiful example of the kind of impact that we've had. So Abdi Fattah from Somali wrote, "The Alliance has been our global backup and has been amplifying our voices ever since we joined. And Somali activists have benefited so much from the Alliance's advocacy resources. And as a result of our local campaigns, the first sexual offenses bill was passed by the cabinet ministers last week." So this is
just an incredible
example of what happens when you're supporting the right people on the ground who lead this work. And just, one last one. Yemi from Nigeria says, "I came in contact with Women Thrive in December 2014, and since then, my organization has never been the same again. I benefited so much from this network. I am now very empowered, visible, and better networked." And so I think it's this idea of, building and strengthening and investing in our grassroots movements so that progress can happen for every single woman and girl around the world.
That's amazing. And you've mentioned several countries already. So what differences are there in women's advocates' needs in the different countries or the different continents? So what about the difference between Europe and Africa and Asia or the Americas? I mean, it must be very different.
Absolutely.
I would have thought, because of the levels of progress, even just the geographical areas and the different cultures.
Absolutely. Our model was based on the belief that our members on the ground are the experts, and they're going to tell us what they need from us. And so, instead of maybe coming in with a one-size-fit-all approach to advocacy, we were really starting everything by listening to what women on the ground actually need. And you're right, in some countries, there is just really no easy online connection, right? So our members in DRC and Africa, we knew in the past 2 years that if we wanted products to actually get to them, if we wanted them to benefit from, capacity building, we were going to have to be very creative in terms of getting that content to them, whether it was through WhatsApp, which is, a phone app, or whether it was by actually printing a lot of these courses and sending them to them. Our members in India also had different needs. And while some Indian members in the bigger cities had great connections, the ones in the rural areas didn't. And so, creating this model where those who do have access are then able to communicate by phone with others. But then, also in terms of what people need. So our members in Haiti, in the Caribbean, went through a horrendous earthquake several years ago and learned so much from that experience. And when the earthquake happened in Nepal a few years ago, we actually connected our members from Haiti to those in Nepal so that they could learn from each other. And so it was about us adapting our services, but us also recognizing and honoring that these incredible advocates are also the holders of expertise that can really make a difference in other advocates' lives. And so connecting them, in different regions on the other sides of the world was a really important part of what we did. Those are just a few examples. I think, when it came to uplifting local voices to global spaces like the United Nations, it's actually interesting. A lot of advocates are facing the same challenges and the same barriers. And so we also obviously had, our Achieve SDG 5 program, which was about really amplifying what was being done at national level whether in India, Nepal, Tanzania or Sierra Leone, to these UN spaces, that was a model that worked for everyone and that we all did collectively together.
Yeah, it sounds incredible. It sounds the power that you can get from contacting people and putting them in contact and amplifying all their voices. It's really amazing what that can do.
You are listening to Anna Letitia Cook at Women Up Radio.
Okay, so what can grassroots movements accomplish, and how can we as the public support them best in raising their voices?
Grassroots movements, for me, are the engine of social change. And there is really no social change process that can be successful or last without grassroots movements leading it. And we've seen it so many times throughout history. And I think for some reason, both historical, political, our development sector, all these stakeholders that are investing in ending poverty worldwide still have to really learn that truth. What we've witnessed is that when you equip grassroots women with the skills they need, they can change anything. Will they face challenges and barriers? Of course. But there's also this important point to make that grassroots movements are actually the only ones who can not just change things, but also, continue and nurture the change that has already been done. And what I mean by that is that a lot of people always ask me, so, what's next? Like, we've made this progress. Like, what is the next, big thing? The truth is, women on the ground are just trying to uphold their basic rights. Yeah. And we've seen, especially in the past few years, how quickly that can change, both, positively and negatively. And so what they accomplish is really on a day-to-day making sure that the rights that have been won are actually kept.
Yes.
And are able to, to be accessed and to be lived by women and girls on the ground.
That's so important.
It is. It really is. And that's our vision of social change, which is, always onwards, which is wonderful. But social change also has a life cycle of its own. And, it does feel right now where we're actually in a phase where there's more upholding to be done than actual, new things coming up. Yeah. I will say that the public has an incredible role to play in all of this. I know often we feel very disconnected from these bigger issues. How can I, who live in Maryland, USA, or in Sussex in the UK, have, impact child marriage? But there's so much that we can do. First of all, we can invest in these grassroots organizations. And, people who give, I think, out of compassion and generosity, if they are able to do some research in terms of what is the difference between a big international organization and a local women's groups. And, we're in 2018, a lot of great women's rights organizations in countries like Nigeria or even in Asia, you can actually give to them online. It's possible to give your money to organizations that are deeply rooted in communities and who are actually providing, this crucial support to women on the ground. So investing in them, of course, also following them online and raising their visibility. You would be amazed at how many women advocates have Twitter accounts now. Yes. And, we've seen the power of social media. And one thing that we had done at Women Thrive really well was to share those Twitter handles with our own supporters. So all of a sudden, our member in Cameroon has, 3,000 followers.
Oh, really? That makes such a difference.
It does, because when she is then going to talk to her government about, investing in an issue like breast ironing, that is an issue that a lot of women face in Cameroon, she can say, look, it's not just me. I represent a group of people. I represent Cameroonians who live abroad. I have a following. So following them and raising their visibility is the second thing that the public can do. Yeah. And then, putting pressure on our governments and donors to really, push through a certain vision of development. I mean, when a country like the UK signs a budget for international development, because constituents all around the country can actually write to their elected officials and say, we want to make sure that our tax money actually goes to funding grassroots organizations. What are you going to do about it? And I think adding that voice to, that vision of social change and development, or what it should be, I think is very important.
Yeah, I totally agree. Totally. So what do you see as being pivotal to the development of the next generation of women's leaders? Mm-hmm. Where do you think they're going to come from? And in what areas do you think that women will achieve the most progress? Because I think this is very closely linked to the accomplishments that grassroots movements can make, mm-hmm. and women's rights groups in general. Because we need more women leaders to have a better vision, what do you think is the pivotal part of their development?
Yes, I think the next generation of women leaders will be as wonderful as this one, but they will have so many new tools, and mainly technology-based tools that the previous ones didn't, and that will enable them to do even more, right? And to combat trends like, closing civic spaces and attacks on advocates. I mean, we've seen it over the past 3 years. We've run an online platform where there were over 400 individuals, advocates connecting, supporting each other, and finding solutions to some of the issues they were facing on the ground. And so I think the next generation is really going to tap into that virtual energy in a powerful way, and really use it to both, protect itself and be safe and do the work in an impactful way, use it to influence governments and other stakeholders, the private sector, and then use it really as a movement building tool, right? As a way to bring in allies, as a way to bring in champions. And so I see their power, being amplified by these tools. And I think that's a wonderful thing that we should all look forward to. I think that women's political participation, but not just in the traditional sense of how many women are we going to elect to parliament. I think women's and young women's access to governance, whether it's the local or the national or the global level, that is going to be the tipping point. I think we're just at this moment in our global history where I think people are realizing that is needed, that it's a good thing, and the women on the ground are actually making it happen. And we're seeing it here in the US, but we're also seeing it, all around the world. We have several members who are running for office in Africa and who are doing it in a different way, really in a way that is about bringing these voices into the governance of their communities and their countries. And so I think the time is ripe. I think we're going to have a huge wave of women and young women and girls being really active and impactful citizens, and that's going to change a lot of things. And then I also think that we're finally seeing progress, around the stigmatization of sexual violence and gender-based violence. And I think there's been a backlash because you never get change without backlash. But I do believe that everywhere, definitely here in the US, but also in India and countries like Egypt, there is this small yet very important space that has been open to really, do an exercise of self-assessment as societies and countries. And I think that the issue of sexual violence and how women who survive these episodes are treated by society, I think we're going to see some progress there, but it's going to take time, and it's going to be, of course, about political will as well.
So what do you think are the priorities that women should focus on most to really ignite the flames and to spread the word so that they achieve the greatest impact? Should it be something like that, or are there other topics that you think are equally or more important?
I think it's about momentum and opportunity, right? So every issue is important, and, the movement won't stop until every single issue out there is dealt with for every woman and girl. But I think it's about the movement being able, and when I say the movement, I mean every single person, organization, government, everyone who's trying to really end gender inequality. How are we going to be able to grab these opportunities? I think one of the priorities to grab the opportunities should be to bring in our allies, right? I think the conversation about men's engagement has finally matured to something that is more than just men should be supportive of women's rights. It's actually how men are allies and how are they active in a way that is strengthening us and amplifying our own agency and voice rather than taking on the leadership for change. I think the whole discussion about bringing in allies and really expanding our base as a global movement is very important. And that is being done really well by grassroots groups all around the world. We're seeing huge progress on the ground, even in countries or, cultures where it's been traditionally difficult to have men stand up for women's rights. Our member in Somalia was telling us that he still gets a lot of, questions from government officials, like, why are you working at a women's rights organization? But there is this interest in being part of the dialogue. And so I think grabbing that opportunity and being smart about how we expand our pool of allies and include men and boys will be incredibly important. And then, the other thing is, I do think we have an opportunity around the issue of sexual violence and how it's been institutionalized and how it's really part of our DNA as societies, as cultures. And this is something that we all share. Of course, there are very different, significances and different ways that it comes out in different countries. But this is a global pandemic, violence against women. And so I think, taking the momentum around that and pushing it a little deeper to really have conversations that go beyond, sharing stories, but actually go into how do we dismantle all of these social norms? How do we, end this kind of invisible pattern of abuse? So I think there's a lot of work to do there too.
Yeah. That's very true. I think the violence that is so integrated into some areas, it's incredible. It really, something has to happen, and it's only with a lot of people continuing to talk about it and to not just talk but act on it and make the change happen. It's so important, because if that's no longer considered, acceptable is not the right word, but if it's no longer ignored, if it's really brought out in the open and stamped on so people can't do it and get away with it, I think that's one of the first steps towards respect and equality, because women aren't then treated like chattels and servants or animals. They get the opportunity to really grow. Mm-hmm. So as a last question for the listeners who are very active, and I know a lot of them come back to me and say, what can we do? How can we change something? Give us some ideas. What would you suggest as a really effective strategy that we can do on a personal level to support and advocate for change?
I would say do some research and find your community. And your community could be right next door. Your community could be a group of women fighting some of these issues on the other side of the world. But find a place and a cause, and then get involved for the long run. There are some, incredible practical ways to do that. Definitely connecting with an organization like World Pulse. As an individual, you can have a profile on this beautiful platform. You can meet women from all around the world, learn what they're doing, and then choose which journey you want to be part of. I think making a conscious decision about how you're going to be a change agent and who you are going to support and then committing to being there for the long run is I think going to be incredibly powerful, and you will learn a lot along the way, and you will have a real impact.
Yeah.
I think we also tend to, as individuals from the public, everything is very confined, right? The women that we see on the news are far away and we can't get to them. That's why we do bigger organizations that can get to them. But actually, it's 2018. We can be in solidarity and an active participant in these beautiful journeys in real ways. And so I think I would encourage people to think about what they feel strongly about, and then do the research and find a way to connect with someone who is doing this work, and they will tell you what they need from you. It might be money, it might be connections, it might be hosting them when they come to New York to be part of the United Nations conference. It could be a whole set of things, but being in there for the long run, you'll have the opportunity to give in a way that is meaningful.
Wonderful. Thank you. So thank you very much, Emily. It's been very